As a transmission owner and operator, and ITC was formed back in 2003 as the first independent transmission company in the United States. We also today have 3 operating companies, and we operate transmission systems in Michigan, Iowa, part of Minnesota, part of Illinois, and a smidge of Missouri. And we also develop transmission in other areas of the country. And the purpose of the panel today was really to focus on what are the main things that are prohibiting transmission from getting developed. Obviously, a lot of what we do deals with our existing systems and making sure that they're reliable and are essentially providing value to the customers at the lowest possible cost. But there was also a focus on building these larger scale transmission projects. And in building those transmission projects, what are the main things that are really stopping us from moving forward on those?
Well, now your company has the Green Power Express. You're trying to, I think is it the largest transmission project now under consideration?
It is,
in the US?
if not the biggest, it's one of the biggest.
Okay.
And
pretty ambitious. So what are you running up against here?
It's interesting because about a year and a half ago, well before the last presidential election, we sat down and really asked the question, with all of the wind that's seeking to be integrated into the system to meet either state requirements or a future federal mandate for renewable energy, if you could plan a system that would ignore state boundaries, ignore utility company service territory boundaries, and design, quote unquote, the perfect system, what would it look like? So we sat down and put our planners to work and really came up with essentially a system that would interconnect the wind in the upper Midwest and the Dakotas and Iowa and bring that power across the Midwest and essentially interconnect it into the existing high voltage transmission system in Illinois and Indiana and take that power further to the east and maybe even down into the southeast. When we developed that process, we took it to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and received preliminary approval to move forward on that. And we've begun this process now of working with the utility companies that exist in those particular areas that would be obviously affected by these transmission lines, and at the same time started talking with, addressing the issues and started talking with policymakers with dealing with, okay, how do you make sure that the planning that we've done is now being done in accordance with the criteria that the federal government has established in an open and transparent way so that you get all the stakeholder input into the process. And then dealing with issues such as cost allocation. Ultimately these things cost a lot of money, but at the same time, you need to have a rational mechanism for recovering those costs. And then thirdly, just dealing with the siting. And so that's really our three areas of focus right now in Washington.
How many states are you dealing with, and what's the reaction you're getting there?
The Midwest ISO is comprised of 14 states or provinces, and then you introduce the fact that you have Commonwealth Edison service territory in Northern Illinois, which is actually part of PJM, and you have all of those states that are potentially affected by this. So there's obviously a lot of concern about transmission projects, and specifically transmission lines that are being developed in areas where there isn't a large population, and not a lot of large energy consumers, but at the same time those lines are moving across their areas, and in some cases the way the policies exist today, they're being asked to pay for them. And it's a reasonable question to ask, if I don't need the renewable energy, or if I have no interest in seeing it developed, then why should I ultimately have to pay for it? So there's a lot of debate and discussion, and you get a lot of states, rightfully so, looking at their own self-interest here and saying, well, we have an in-state renewable standard, we don't need wind from the Dakotas to meet our requirements, even though it might be cheaper or more efficient. But that being said, I think you're definitely seeing this play out, and you're seeing, obviously everybody that has a position on this coming out and putting that position forward.
Well, with all the new emphasis we've been hearing on renewables, are a lot of states, a lot of places really hesitating to get access to this midwestern wind? It's supposed to be such a fabulous resource.
Sure, I think I wouldn't say resisting. I would say hesitant and cautiously concerned about how this gets done.
Is it mainly the cost that they're worried about?
The cost, and obviously how it affects their existing systems. One of the things that we have been a strong advocate for is having a national energy policy. Right now you have a lot of states that have their own energy policy, which factor in a lot of different things, including economic development and jobs and having in-state renewable resources. And it's really focused specifically on those individual states. What we don't have is this national energy policy, and without a national energy policy that says we're all going to build to a certain level of renewable energy, we're going to address carbon, all of these different things, you're going to see the parochial nature really play itself out and continue to play itself out without really any resolution. Cost allocation is just one factor that we struggle with.
Well, where are you in the process now? How many years have you been working on it? How many years is it going to take you out?
When you build transmission, nothing happens quickly, that I can say. Obviously, the project itself has been approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We're continuing to work with the affected stakeholders, both the utility companies, the consumers, the state and federal policymakers. The RTOs, the regional transmission organizations like the Midwest ISO, have their own planning processes that are looking at these same areas, and they're doing it in arguably a more robust manner than what we did kind of unilaterally to a certain extent. But what we're seeing, the results of those studies are coming out with lines that look pretty darn similar to what we had planned as well, because you're doing it to engineering specifications. So if you weren't seeing those same lines, you would really question the underlying engineering studies or the planning studies. But they're looking at it. You're also looking at development of policy that will, move these things forward, because right now we're just not seeing that.
Do you have a lot of developers who are ready who say, you build that transmission line and we'll have turbines there?
Most definitely. You have a lot of the wind developers, especially up in the upper Midwest and in Iowa, and we're really seeing it down in the Southwest area, in the Southwest Power Pool region, where you have developers that are saying, I want to interconnect my wind, and the only thing that's inhibiting me from interconnecting my wind is the fact that I don't have the transmission facilities in which to interconnect. The problem is with the interconnection cost allocation policies that exist today, that first guy that interconnects his wind facility is going to have to bear all of the costs, not only of interconnecting his facility, but all of the upgrades that go along with upgrading the transmission system to move that power longer distances. So, the first person is going to be very hesitant to step up and say, interconnect me, because they're just going to have all those costs dumped on them, which again takes us back to why you need to have a rational cost allocation policy. Obviously, Congress has the ability to step in the form of setting a national energy policy that addresses transmission issues as well as renewable issues as well as potentially climate issues, which will really set the general broad parameters for moving forward on these. Absent that, obviously the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has quite a bit of authority for moving forward on some of these projects. I think they're in a very difficult situation with the energy legislation still being debated in Congress of essentially overstepping or appearing to overstep their authority in moving forward when Congress is still debating these issues. And then, there is, some hope that we give to these voluntary processes that are taking place. Just recently, the Department of Energy funded a group of transmission planning authorities, of which we are one, to come together and create the Eastern Interconnection Planning Collaborative, which is really looking at the eastern grid from Montana to Maine to Miami, all the way over to Louisiana. So in that regard, you're looking at a very broad area. The one thing that process lacks really is a way to address disagreements among the people that are working within that process. So our biggest fear is that it's going to get pushed down to the least common denominator, and we're not going to be really successful in doing what I think the intent of DOE was when they awarded those funds. But again, we're hopeful, and we're working with EIPC to see if that can come to fruition. So in that regard, Congress, we would be hopeful that would probably be the best scenario. But absent that, we think FERC and maybe some of these voluntary activities will get us to where we need to go.